we're seeing kind of like the nails in the coffin of the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine. I've brought you so much information on this over the past several months. The fact that all of the fighting, all of the death, all of the destruction over the past year in 2023, even the New York Times, and again, New York Times is kind of like Wikipedia, where when it makes it to the New York Times, even the liberal world is now admitting to it. It's even gotten there. Like when each little piece of Russiagate collapsed. Once that collapse finally got buried in the pages of the New York Times, it even got there. You're like, it's not just us saying it anymore. Well, now we can say that about Ukraine. So one of the things I brought you several weeks ago is that the New York Times showed that all of the fighting, all of the death and destruction in Ukraine and the proxy war there, all of it added up to minuscule changes in land. Tiny little land changes where Ukraine would gain a few miles and then Russia would gain a few miles, and very little movement over the entire of 2023. And I've also brought you the statements by the higher ups in Ukraine, some anonymous statements in the inner circle of Zelensky saying they know it's over, saying there's no chance that Ukraine's going to win all their territory back, etc., and saying it has to end at a peace table, which is what I and some others on the independent side of media were saying from day one. Day goddamn one. So anyway, here is the latest. Let's see here. And this is a report from Financial Times, not a left-wing outlet. This is a right-wing outlet who, as their title tells you, only care about money. Isn't it amazing you can have an outlet called "We Only Give a Shit About Money"? We're just greedy fracks. Just greedy facts. And all we care about is money, and yet that's the name of the publication, and everybody's just like, yeah, that's fine. That's cool. U.S. funding for Ukraine set to run out by the end of the year, the White House says. And there's been very little effort by Congress or even the White House. There's been some statements, but not much. There's been very little effort from the U.S. or Congress to change that, meaning the money is going to run out, and they're fine with that. They're fine with no longer funding this proxy war because, as I've said so much over the past several months, I'm tired of repeating it. The U.S. had a bunch of things they wanted to achieve. The U.S. government wanted to achieve with this proxy war in Ukraine. Some of it they got. The things they got include cutting Russia off from the rest of Europe, right? Russia is no longer economically aligned with Europe. This pushes Europe back into a vassal system with the United States. Other things were putting sanctions on Russia that they thought were going to be more harmful, but have largely backfired or not worked. Another effort was to get the propaganda of making Russia the big bad guy around the world. Now, some of it worked, but really it didn't work. You have 80% of the world's population living in countries that have not supported the U.S. proxy war with Russia. So in many ways, what the U.S. wanted has not worked, but what they did want, and the last thing they wanted was or a major thing they wanted was to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. All of the things they wanted that they got have already happened, that they were succeeded in. All of the things they wanted that they didn't get have already failed. So the U.S. no longer really has an interest in Ukraine. They didn't care about civilians or the society or anything else from day one. They were more than willing to wreck Ukraine, especially since it was a former Soviet country. And you think the U.S. gives a shite about a former Soviet country? So they destroyed, the U.S. government, U.S. military helped destroy Ukraine, and now they're ready to just cut it loose. And this is more evidence of it. The funding is going to run out. And the White House is doing very little about it. Congress doesn't give a shit. And it will run out by the end of the year. So we're on the edge. What's Ukraine going to do then? What are their options of Zelensky? The U.S. funding was the only thing barely keeping this thing afloat, and now it's this, garbage proxy war afloat, and now it's basically done. Basically done.